Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for taking time to join us for our Wisconsin's Green Fire issue briefing on creating a shared vision for wolves in Wisconsin. My name is Fred Clark. I'm the Executive Director of Wisconsin's Green Fire, and we are joined today by our Science Director, Sarah Peterson, and our team of Green Fire member experts who have worked with us over the last 6 months really to develop our analysis and our recommendations on this important issue. The paper we are releasing today on gray wolves is one of a series of policy papers on key conservation issues that Green Fire will be releasing over the next several months. Well, we appreciate that you're taking time to join us today for this, our first one in the what we're calling the Opportunities Now 2.0 series. Wisconsin's Green Fire supports the conservation legacy of Wisconsin by promoting science-based management of our natural resources. Green Fire members live and work throughout Wisconsin, and they support our focus on a range of issues, including wildlife, fisheries, forestry, water resources, farm, agricultural policy, and working lands and public lands, and the many different aspects of climate change and its influence on natural resources. But wildlife management is and has been one of our core focal issues in Wisconsin's Green Fire, and that's part of what we'll be talking about with you today. But we encourage you to learn more from our website at wigreenfire.org. Or to contact me or Sarah Peterson with any questions or follow-up that you'd like to do related to this program. Oh, really, the recovery of gray wolves in the Lake States is a conservation success story, and we believe that it's one that all Wisconsin citizens can justifiably be proud of. After being almost completely eliminated from our landscape, and after years of changing legal status from threatened to endangered to delisted and back, and innumerable court battles. And despite that, after 50 years of a gradual but continual recovery, we find ourselves today with a substantially recovered and a population of wolves that is beginning to stabilize here in Wisconsin. And with that, finally, for perhaps the first time in over 100 years, we have the opportunity to set a course for a more stable coexistence between wolves and humans, and to get our relationship right with these incredible animals. It will take effort and investment to achieve that goal, but that possibility is now within our reach, and that's really the focus of this work. Our wolf team, led by Sarah Peterson, has brought together 4 careers worth of experience to this issue. And together, the team has helped us craft this assessment and a playbook for what Wisconsin needs to do, starting today, to ensure that we can assume responsibility for managing wolves in a way that protects the species while balancing the full range of public interests and opinions. So we welcome you today. We welcome your interest in this issue. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah Peterson, our Science Director.
Thank you, Fred, and thanks to everyone for attending today's briefing. Just briefly, we will go through just short introductions here. I'm going to describe a little bit of our process and how it is that we went through this. And then Adrian Weideman is going to talk to you about some of our key recommendations from the paper, which you should all have access to at this point. You might not have read it in full detail yet, but we welcome any questions that you have at the second half of this program. So again, my name is Sarah Peterson. I am Wisconsin Green Fire's Science Director. So I work hand in hand with our work group chairs and leaders on issues that range from water resources to wildlife management. And I had the pleasure of working with this very esteemed group that you see in front of you. Our paper is the result of a very successful collaboration that combines some very diverse perspectives and backgrounds. Wolves and wolf conservation and management in this state has a very storied history, and there's a lot of opinions and perspectives and things that we had to navigate as a team. But we came together and we did a lot of really good consensus building as a process, or as a result. And this was a very iterative process altogether. We spent months putting this paper together, and we're really happy with the way it turned out. The paper provides a vision for gray wolf management on the landscape throughout Wisconsin. We talk a little bit about the history, how wolves have been managed historically. And we also go into some of our key recommendations and policies and practices, and lay out a conservation framework for gray wolves. So now I'm going to introduce some of our paper contributors who are all here on the phone today or on Zoom, and would be happy to chime in and answer any questions that you have. So on the far left, we have Adrian Weideven, and Adrian is Greenfire's Wildlife Work Group co-chair, and he is also the board chair of the Council for the Timber Wolf Alliance. He's a wildlife biologist by training and has over 20 years of experience at the Wisconsin DNR. Tom Hauge on the top there, to the right of Adrian, is also one of Greenfire's Wildlife Work Group co-chairs. He's also a board member of the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation, and he serves as the president of the Sauk County Conservation Alliance. He also has 20 years of experience at Wisconsin's DNR. And both Adrian and Tom are retired and devote their time to these various causes. Peter David, to the right of Tom, is also a Wisconsin Greenfire member. He's a wildlife biologist with the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, and he has a background in wildlife ecology and is helping to represent some of the tribal interests here on the call today. To his right, we have Jody Havish-Sinekin, and she is also a Wisconsin Greenfire board member. She's also one of our newest board members, and she serves as legal counsel for the Midwest Environmental Advocates. She has a background in water policy and a law degree from Harvard Law. So I'm going to turn it over because I don't want to take up too much more time. I'm going to turn it over to Adrian Weideven, who is going to talk about some of our key recommendations in the paper.
Thank you, Sarah. So 3 recommendations that I want to talk about especially, and these are listed on page 13 and 14 of the report. The first one is that we're hoping with as the DNR starts wolf harvesting the current wolf population, that until a new wolf conservation plan is in place, we encourage that to maintain the population near current levels, which are estimated to be between 866 to 1,034 wolves at minimum count that were counted in mid-late winter the last 3 years. Because we haven't developed a full plan yet, we feel it's important to not drastically reduce the current wolf population. Our second recommendation is developing that new plan. I headed up the DNR's Wolf Committee when we developed our 1999 plan. Now that's a 21-year-old document, and it's now too old a document to really be guiding our current wolf management, and we need to update that plan, the latest in social studies of attitudes toward wolves, the scientific data that's accumulated since then. That older plan was based on knowledge of wolf carrying capacity in the mid-1990s, population viability analysis at that time. So things such as a population goal of that 1999 plan are no longer appropriate at current times. The other area that we're especially interested in is seeing changes in the legislation that currently guides wolf harvest in Wisconsin. The current regulations that were developed in 2012 by our legislature requires, it says the DNR shall hold a wolf hunting season if they're not listed as a threatened or endangered species by either the state or federal governments. So it requires the DNR to hold a harvest instead of allowing the DNR to hold a harvest. So we would like to really have that change to May and give more power back to DNR and the general public as to determining how we harvest the wolf population, what the methods of take are, when the start of the season should be, when the ending of the season should be, areas that are open and close to wolf harvest, including areas around Indian reservations that we have concerns that tribal packs living on tribal lands are exposed to harvest because the areas closed are only at the edge of the reservation boundaries. And there's probably no pack on an Indian reservation in Wisconsin that doesn't extend its home range outside that reservation land. So they're all potentially exposed to wolf harvest under current regulations. So those are the three areas that we especially would like to see changes in and have recommendations on how the wolf population would be managed in the future. And with that, I guess we're ready to open it up to questions, Sarah, or did you have any
Yeah,
additional?
well, we're actually a little ahead of schedule, which is which is always refreshing with these things. I would just invite any of the other paper contributors, Peter, Jody, Tom, if you have anything else you'd like to add from what Adrian just mentioned before we go into questions.
This is
Okay.
Peter. I guess I would just say, one of the other things you will see in the document is a recommendation that as the state goes forward to update that plan, how they do the process for that's going to be very important. And we make some strong recommendations about going back the way the state operated in the past by having separate sort of wolf science committees and wolf stakeholder groups, and feel strongly that that's really in the best interest, I think, of the Wisconsin public. It also, frankly, I think serves the tribes better to separate out some of the best science recommendations and those social recommendations and keep those distinct from each other until some sausage has to be made with them from the end.
Yeah, great point. Thank you, Peter. Thanks for pointing that out. I think that's important that, we do talk about it frequently throughout the paper. It's something that we are emphasizing.
I would
Anything
just
else,
add
Jody?
one thing too, Sarah. I really appreciated the way that our paper framed, as Fred stated, the opportunity that Wisconsin has to establish a stable coexistence with wolves. And so much of that is accomplished through a transparent and inclusive process, as Peter just referenced. And our plan really, we took a lot of time trying to make recommendations concerning that process so that the state is ready to go and can proceed to update the 1999 Wolf Management Plan in a fashion that does allow for inclusion and a variety of representative voices. Something that we took note of is that Wisconsin certainly does not need to reinvent the wheel. We have a long history of having an excellent process for wildlife decisions. And we have our neighbor, Minnesota, who began its own update of a 2001 wolf management plan a year ago in November of 2019. And they have already demonstrated a round of public attitude surveys, a series of listening sessions, a process, as Peter just referenced, which include a range of technical wolf experts, as well as a separate broadly representative stakeholder advisory group. So we have an excellent model in our own Wisconsin history, and as well as other states who are really leaning into their democratic history. So I'm very excited to see how the results of our recommendations play out in Wisconsin. I think we have an excellent opportunity ahead of us.
Perfect. Perfectly said, Jody. Thank you. So we are at 15 minutes past the hour, and I would love to invite anyone on the call to ask a question. You can either dump it into the chat or raise your hand if you're on video, and we will ask. We'll invite you to unmute and ask your question. Okay, it looks like Katie Thoracine. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce your last name correctly. Katie, if you want to unmute.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, this is Katie Thorson with WXPR. I was hoping that someone might be able to go into a bit more detail about how public perception of wolves has changed in recent years regarding wolves.
Sure. There have been surveys on public attitudes in Wisconsin been done over the years since about 2000 or so. In general, what we see when you look at very small areas is that the attitudes have probably declined, especially in wolf range. And Adrian Trevis at UW-Madison has conducted quite a bit of research along those lines. Within the areas where wolves are living, there seems to be a decline in wolf attitudes. Statewide, I think we do see that there is strong support. And in general, in wolf range, most people do support wolves. There was a study done in Wisconsin 2014 that does show that in general, most people do support wolf conservation, but there is a trend within some areas that within wolf range that the attitudes seem to be declining.
Great, thank you for that question, Katie.
You know, I would just add, it'd be nice to do an even more recent update of that social survey that was done in 2014 in Wisconsin. That was a very good piece of work. People who are interested in wolf range could also look at the state of Minnesota very recently completed just in the last year. And both of those surveys really show strong support for maintaining wolf populations at high levels. Oftentimes it's, you know, people are asked, is the current population something they would like to maintain or increase or decrease? And both of those surveys in Wisconsin, Minnesota had a higher predominance of people wanting to keep the population where it was or increase it than to reduce it.
And I would just add that I think it's also kind of hard to separate attitudes regarding the wolves themselves and the legal conundrum that Wisconsin has been dealing with over recent years with the federal listing. Many parts of Wisconsin have felt powerless to deal with the real world issues that they have, rather it be depredation or some other issue. And so some of that frustration with the political legal process, I think, gets placed on the shoulders of the wolves.
Great, are there other questions from folks on the line?
You know, I'll just add that something that I think we've concluded as a result of especially learning from Adrian and Peter and others is that whether or not Wisconsin has wolf hunting will not remove the need for continued investment in managing human-wolf conflicts and minimizing human-wolf conflicts. And the effort that goes into supporting landowners in wolf range and helping them apply practices that will minimize the threats or the possibility of wolf depredations are really important investments that need to continue. And probably one of the most important ways that we help minimize the negative views of wolves and help make it possible to live with wolves in the landscape.
Yes, very good point. Thank you, Fred. It looks like Katie has an additional question. Katie?
Yeah, I'll jump in here if no one else wants to. You were going off of, you were saying about the lawsuits and how that's played a role in Wisconsin and the wolves. Obviously, this, I can't remember if there's been lawsuits actually filed against this one, but I imagine that this will end up in court somehow. Why is it worth still going through this process to come up with a management plan, even if it gets overturned again, the delisting gets overturned again in the courts?
Adrian or Jody or
could,
Peter want to take that?
Katie, could you rephrase that? I'm not sure I fully understand your question.
So I previously talked to the DNR, and it was before the wolves have been delisted, and they said, once they're actually delisted is when we'll start coming up with a management plan, but not beforehand. And so I'm saying, with the possibility of this delisting getting reversed in the courts again, why is it important to go through this process now or start it now when it could just be reinstated, the listing get reinstated?
Well, I think what we feel is that the management plan ought to be updated regardless of how they're federally listed. And that seems to be the tack that Minnesota is taking. They're going to update their plan regardless of how the federal government lists them. Through the last 20 years, there have been, I think, 2 or 3 updates of the Michigan wolf management plan. So there's no reason we can't go ahead and update our state management plan, including the latest science on wolf biology, wolf ecology, the latest on social attitude surveys that have been done since then. All of that needs to be incorporated into a new plan. So regardless of how the federal government lists them, they still need, the plan still needs to be updated.
And there, I will just add that there's a lot of value in the process as the diverse group of stakeholders come together and discuss some of the issues that Fred just talked about, or how to best monitor wolves, how to address the concerns that the tribes may be bringing forward. There is great value in getting people around the table to discuss this, irrespective of whether or not the federal listing is reversed or held up in courts.
One thing I would add as well is having an updated sound management plan is a strong base of support for Wisconsin to demonstrate to the federal government, and if there is ensuing litigation, that the state is prepared and ready to manage our population in accord with best available science. And in the absence of a plan, we don't have that leg to stand on.
Great, thank you. I think, Steve, you had your hand up at one point on the camera and I missed you. I apologize. You want to unmute?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so, well, this is the first time doing this on Zoom. I think my question would be for Adrian. In the initial invitation that you sent out to the media, you listed 3 points of interest, and then in the summary, you said that gray wolves serve a critical role maintaining healthy forests and landscape biodiversity. So I would like you, if you could, to briefly summarize what the role of the wolves is in maintaining biodiversity and healthy forests, and why you think it's critical.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, so in our literature citation in this report, you'll see several papers that we published in there. There's a Boucher and others talking about how wolves impact some of the members of the lily family, and the grazing pattern of deer is affected because of the presence of wolves. In the interior of wolf territories, there's much less heavy grazing pattern on these members of the lily family. There's a paper by Collin and others that shows that within the interior of wolf territories, there's a higher diversity of forbs of prairie, of woodland plants, the wildflowers growing. There's a greater diversity of them. There's a paper by Flagel and others that shows less heavy browsing on the seedlings and saplings that are growing in the interior of the forest areas where the wolves are, and less along the edges where there's more higher deer pressure. So the presence of wolves are impacting the movements in the presence of deer and affecting their behavior and the impact they're having on the vegetation. There's a paper also citing by Wild and others that shows that modeling suggesting that the presence of wolves can have a thinning effect on disease animals in a deer population. So there's less likeliness of chronic wasting disease spreading through a wolf population in areas where there's healthy wolf population. So those are some of the things that we're citing, that there's a healthier diversity of wildflowers in the understory, that there's a better growth of trees, saplings, and shrubs in areas where there are wolves, that there's less likeliness of diseases, deer diseases spreading through those areas. So those are the reasons we feel they're critical to a healthy forest ecosystem. Did you have a follow-up there?
Yeah, yes, I do. So I understand what you're saying there, but wouldn't the same things be accomplished by just managing the deer herd through hunting?
Well, I think it's probably a combination is probably the best way to do it, that the four-legged predators have some advantage over the two-legged predators, and they're more selective of certain traits. It's been found, for instance, in Colorado with cougars that cougars are 3 to 5 times as likely to select animals with chronic wasting disease than human hunters are. And cougars are probably, as a stalking hunter, are probably even less selective than a coursing hunter like wolves that run down their prey. So wolves are going to be much more selective of those diseased animals within a population than would human hunters. Human hunters kind of harvest the average animal they encounter, whereas wolves have much more of a selective effect on the deer herd.
And I would just add to that, of course, too, wolves are putting that influence on the deer herd 365 days a year, not just during certain time windows. So that impact potentially on disease is something that is ongoing.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for your question, Steve. There's a question here from Terry Dalton about the odds or potential for future legal challenges into the next year. Somebody want to take that? Jody, do you want to maybe touch on that?
Sorry, trying to unmute. I think that much of the legal challenges comes from outside of Wisconsin. There's national organizations who are looking at wolf restoration on a nationwide scale, on appropriate habitat in places where wolves had previously lived and now just have either very tiny populations or none at all. In places like Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan, wolves have restored their populations very well, as we have described. So we're not in a similar situation as places on the Pacific West Coast or in the Northeast, like Maine and those places, or even Colorado, which is looking to reintroduce wolves. So that's where those litigation decisions are made, is looking at the big picture for restoration of the species across the nation for appropriate habitat. So it's not necessarily in sync with the situation that we have here in Wisconsin, where wolves have approached or have reached biological carrying capacity, and there's not a perfect sync there, given where we are compared to places out west, for example.
I think two groups have indicated that they were planning on suing the Center for Biological Diversity out of New Mexico, and the Humane Society of the US, I think, have both indicated they're planning on suing. Typically, when these lawsuits are filed, it takes about 1.5 to 2 years for them to go through the court system, so that with delisting likely occurring or will be occurring in January 2021, that before it goes through the court system or that would change delisting would probably be another 1.5 off or so. So if a court challenge caused wolves to go back on the endangered species list, it's likely not going to happen until 2022 sometime.
Thank you, Adrian and Jody. I want to be cognizant of the time. We are rolling up on 12:30. Half hour goes fast. And if any of you would like to hang on the line and continue to ask us questions, we invite you to do so. This is not us kicking you off. It's just, we want to be respectful of everyone's busy days. I'll just pull up the last slide here. If you have any additional follow-up questions or inquiries, we'd ask that you direct those to me. And this is my contact information if you'd like to reach out. We thank you so much for your interest in this topic and your engagement. And happy holidays. Anyone else have additional questions? It looks like there's still some folks hanging on. We invite you to unmute, and Steve, it looks like you raised your hand.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on the first question that I had, because in ranges like Iron County or Vilas County, where we don't have much CWD, it seems like the hunters would do a better job in those areas of controlling the deer herd than the necessity for wolves. I'm still going back to the idea that the wolves play a critical role as opposed to just having a role in the environment.
Well, I guess we can get into semantics over critical or important role, but wolves do have an ecological role. Yeah, yes, in places like Iron and Vilas County, there are lower density of deer, especially in those portions of those counties that gets heavy snow amounts. Wolves perhaps play less of an important role there than they might in counties where there's less of that snow amounts and they're less of a snow, and winters are less of an impact on the deer population. But I think that wolves still are more selective than hunters will be on wherever they are in the landscape, and hunters are still going to be harvesting the average deer. I think it's important to have hunting throughout the areas to help manage our deer herd, but I think it's also useful to have wolves in place to help maintain the healthy deer population and have that thinning and culling effect on the deer herd.
Okay.
Just adding on to that, I think if you're talking about numerically controlling deer, then I think hunters are more important, because that's not really the primary impact that wolves have. They're not going to, wolf numbers are determined more by deer numbers than the other way around. But wolves do have this critical role in maintaining the health of that deer herd. So whether you're talking about deer health or deer numbers, the relative significance, I think, of wolves versus human hunters varies.
I think what I was getting at, excuse me, is that the herd in those northern counties is generally pretty healthy. You don't get much for disease, whether it be CWD or anything else. And so the idea that wolves are necessary to cull out sick or injured or, CWD type deer just seems to fall by the wayside in most of the counties in the northern part of the state.
Steve, Tom Hauge jumping in on that one, I agree with you that to date, a lot of our northern counties have been fortunate to escape the CWD issue, but you're not protected from that disease. I think we've all seen situations of, unfortunately, where we've had captive deer farms that have tested positive. That's one potential vector for CWD entering into that landscape. And what we're seeing in Wisconsin is a slow but steady progression northward of the disease as it comes up the Wisconsin River Valley. You've got it in Oneida County. And so I think we're on the front end of learning what CWD is going to do across the northern forest. It may be a couple of decades before it gets fully entrenched, but I don't think there's anybody in the CWD world that would say that northern Wisconsin is immune from this disease.
No, I think if I could jump in there, I think we'd be in total agreement there. But again, the human intervention to prevent CWD, I mean, there's no question about the deer farms. That'd be such an easy way to get rid of most of the CWD problem right away.
If I could add another thought there, I think the ecosystem side of the equation, if we understand it correctly, is that what, as Peter pointed to, wolves are forcing deer into some different movement patterns that reduces their impact on forest regeneration and the browse that they do that Adrian described. And where we are losing species like white cedar and hemlock and white pine in our forests at a level that's been really well documented, I think that wolves are probably helping us reduce that impact while still allowing deer to continue in numbers on the landscape. So that's a really important part of the equation that we describe as ecosystem health. But I guess one other thought that I'd leave you with is, as an organization, we don't want to see wolves back on the endangered species list. From our standpoint, nobody wins when that's the case. And if we're going to avoid that, we need to figure out how to maintain a viable population of wolves. And that's really what our report is aiming at, is staying out of the ESA.
Just a footnote to add to those, those understory plants and things that Adrian talked about being impacted by deer. A lot of those plants to the tribes have important meaning as medicinal plants too. And so it matters a lot which plants are on landscape out there when you've been utilizing many of those things for generations.
Well, the point still stands, though, that human hunting probably would accomplish the same goals as having more wolves.
I don't think that's true. I think human harvest and wolf harvest are entirely different things ecologically. Again, the impact coming throughout the year, the type of animals they're selecting for, the other ecological impacts on the understory. I think really to get those kinds of impacts often requires some sort of pressure year round, not just during certain narrow hunting windows. So I think the impacts of wolves and humans are very, very different. And then just the fact that humans tend to prefer to pick sort of the prime animals out of the herd when they're given the option. Wolves are working at the opposite end of the spectrum and trying to oftentimes take the weakest or poorest conditioned animals.
Yeah. It's bringing up another question, and this is pretty much a genuine just question because you're wildlife experts, but how do the wolves impact the rut for deer? Because they, for the same reasons that you're giving, that the deer change their patterns when wolves are present. In Iron County, the rut generally takes place the week before the rifle season or during the rifle season. And it's a very short period because there aren't that many deer in those counties to begin with, like Iron County. And so the rut is, believe it or not, generally like a 3 or 4 day event. And then it's done. And it seems to me like when there's a lot of wolves in the county like there are right now, it definitely alters the deer behavior. They don't move, and therefore they don't mix like they should. And I'm wondering if you have any insight you could offer on how the wolves might adversely affect reproduction in the deer.
I'm not aware of any research that suggests that wolves are disrupting rutting activity in deer. As the way they're moving about on the landscape, they occupy fairly large home range areas. By this time of the year, they're normally in this kind of nomadic mode where the pack is traveling as a group through their territories. And in places like Iron Vilas County, where your deer densities are lower, they have fairly large territories, 50 to 100 square miles that they're traveling about as a group. So unless the group happened to just be in the area where there was a certain rutting buck, I don't see that it would be having that much of an impact. The one thing that rutting might have as an impact is that some of those bucks after the end of the rutting season are in relatively poor physical condition from exhausting themselves through the rut, and they are somewhat susceptible to predation by wolves right at the end of the rutting period for a time period until they've replenished their nutritional status, because many of them are in worn out status at the end of the rutting period. So wolves would take advantage of some of those bucks, but beyond that, I'm not aware of any altering of the rutting behavior that wolves would have. And wolves feed on deer. They need to have a healthy deer population in order to exist on the landscape. So if they totally disrupted the rut and stop rutting activity and start breeding activity, it would make it difficult for wolves to persist.
So I just want to interrupt. Thank you for those questions, Steve. I just,
Yeah.
for the sake of time, I wanted to see if there were
Sure.
any one last question from anyone else on the Zoom call here today. If not, we will wrap up.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate your time and look forward to follow up on this.
And Fred, do you want to mention where the recording will be available? Will we email it? What's the plan to access that? I know there was some interest.
I think we'll make it available on our website and as the report is now, and encourage you to take a look at it, but we'll let folks know they couldn't attend where it is once we get it loaded.
Yeah, I think we'll put it right in the post with our report.
Perfect. Thank you again for attending. Have
Thanks,
a nice
everybody.
day.
Thank you.
Take care all.
I know.